This video is a comprehensive deep dive into hiking the Wonderland Trail around Mount Rainier in Washington. Abby and I just did this incredible loop in 2024, so we've got a ton of relevant, up-to-date information from our own experience that we're putting into this video to help you plan and have an amazing time yourself. This has been one of our favorite backpacking trails to date, and we're so excited to share our experience with you. In this video, we're going to cover how the permitting system works, including how to score one of these hard-to-get permits, how to plan your itinerary, so where to start and end, how to cache your food, and then also off-trail food options. We'll cover a general overview of the trail, talk about the different sections, some of the campgrounds, and the points of interest that we like the best. And we'll also talk about the time of year that you might consider doing this trail, water sources, snowpack, and also how to prepare your gear and your food for a longer hike. If you're new here, our goal at Rooted in Roaming is to help you explore the Pacific Northwest and level up your adventures. So if you feel like you learned something from this video, hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on our adventures and get some inspiration for your own. One more thing before we jump into it. Throughout this video, I'm going to mention an article that we've written, and it has a lot of the same information, but also more things like tables and a helpful map. So definitely go check out that. I'll link to that in the description. It should be a really helpful resource for planning your hike on the Wonderland Trail. So the Wonderland Trail is without a doubt one of the most iconic and beautiful backpacking trails in the Pacific Northwest. It's absolutely stunning. The landscapes along the trail are super diverse. You've got a ton of different views. Elevation changes quite a bit. There's some beautiful wildflowers and some great opportunities for seeing wildlife as well, such as bears and mountain goats. It should go without saying that this trail is for intermediate to advanced backpackers. It is 8 to 10 days and about 95 miles, so you should be pretty comfortable with packing your own gear and feeding yourself for a longer hike. There's a ton of ups and downs, a lot of elevation gain. It really should be approached as a challenging trail. It is super well maintained given how popular the trail is. There's lots of other hikers that you'll see along the way, as well as rangers who will check your permits. All of the rivers, for the most part, have bridges that have been constructed, so that's a really big plus. You don't have to worry about crossing rivers unless there's bridge out, which is pretty rare. The trail is also super well marked. That said, you should have a paper map and possibly a GPS too. All of the campgrounds have bear hangs already set up, so you don't have to worry about finding a good tree. It's really easy to hang up your food each night. I feel like it's gonna be tough to get this down. So I want to start with probably the most prohibitive, confusing, and potentially intimidating part of planning a hike on the Wonderland Trail, and that is the permitting system. The permitting system is highly competitive. This trail is so popular that they can only allow a certain amount of people each year. Definitely worth taking some time to acquaint yourself with how the permitting system works and learning some tips that you can use to score one of these hard to get permits. Overnight permits are required for any overnight stay in all of Mount Rainier National Park, whether that's a car accessible campground or a backcountry campground, or whether it's a campground along the Wonderland Trail or somewhere that's not necessarily on the Wonderland Trail. There are two types of overnight wilderness permits. There's for a group of 1 to 5 people, and then there's what's called group permits, which are 6 to 12 people. So when you build your itinerary, you'll have a permit that's allocated for your group for every single night for each campground that you stay at. It's very rigid and structured, and you can't change that once you're on the trail unless there's an emergency. For groups of 1 to 5, the permits are good for a single site at a campground, and that's supposed to be up to 5 people and 3 tents, although some of the backcountry sites that we saw would probably be a little tight for 3 tents. The permits that are for 6 to 12 people are a little bit more limited. Not all of the backcountry campgrounds actually have group sites, but most of the backcountry campgrounds do have at least one group site. Some of these group sites also have shelters, which can be really nice for rainy weather. It can be done, but it's generally harder to do the entire trail with a group of 6 or more people because of the limited number of group sites. There are 3 different ways to obtain an overnight wilderness permit at Mount Rainier National Park. The first is an early access lottery. This is going to be your most likely way of getting a permit, and what you can do is apply each year that you're interested in hiking the trail in February on recreation.gov, and I'll have all the relevant links for doing this in the description. So the way it works is you apply in February. If you obtain an early access permit window, then you get a specific time to go in and fill out your permit, and that's typically in March. Not all early access lottery time windows are equal. There are some that are available before others, so ideally you get one of the first ones and you have the most availability to choose from. But if you get one of the later ones, you still get to fill out your itinerary before the general population, but you are limited because other people who have filled out the lottery have probably already gotten the higher demand dates and campsites. Early access lottery accounts for about 70% of the total number of permits that are released. So we'll cover a ton of relevant information later in this video about the actual trail so that you can feel more prepared when you go to fill out that itinerary. Let's say you win one of these early access lottery permits, but it's not really a favorable itinerary, so you might have an extra short day or an extra long day, or there's also alternative routes that aren't necessarily the main Wonderland Trail. You can still fill out that itinerary. There is an option to alter your permit the day before your trip starts, and we'll talk about how you can do that, which actually was a huge game changer for us on our hike. If you aren't one of the lucky ones and you don't get a lottery permit, then you can still apply for the kind of normal access permit window. This is really whatever's left over after the people who win the lottery fill out their itinerary. This is typically in late April, so you are going to want to set a notification on your calendar. Typically there's not a ton of options available for this normal access period because most of the desirable dates and campgrounds have already been filled up. It's still worth checking out if you didn't win that lottery, and that way you can build your itinerary if possible. And like I said before, there's a chance that you can alter that to the day before your hike. So the last way to get one of these permits, besides the lottery and besides the normal access period, is by doing a walk-up permit. And this is typically about 30% of the total number of permits that are available. So it's not insignificant. People do get these walk-up permits successfully. We saw 2 people get them during our hike. The thing is, it's unlikely to be a favorable itinerary. So you're probably gonna have an extra long day or an extra short day. So for example, one of the folks that we saw, he had to do a 24-mile day. You really kind of have to be more flexible with what your itinerary is gonna look like. And of course, there's a chance that you actually won't get any permit at all, but it kind of seems like there's a good chance that you will be able to get a permit. You might just have to wait an extra day or 2 before your hike starts, which for a lot of people is pretty tough to take the time off work and, pack all your stuff, try to get one of these permits with all that uncertainty. Regardless of how you get one of these permits, you have to go to one of the wilderness information centers in the park the day before or the day of your start date to pick up your permit in person. It's a piece of paper that you have to hold on your backpack or your tent at all times. The rangers do check your permits. At the end of the day, you do need a permit to hike this trail. Don't even think about doing it without a permit. We actually had some people staying in our site at one of the campgrounds. They didn't have a permit. They were not knowledgeable of the permitting system, but it ended up being a huge inconvenience for us. We had just finished a really long day and we were totally beat, and we rolled into camp to find people in the site that we had a permit for. So we couldn't stay there and we had to find kind of a less desirable spot in a group site, which ended up being a pretty big inconvenience for us. So don't be those people that hike this trail without a permit and make it more miserable for other folks. There is a way to potentially alter your permit and change your itinerary to make it more favorable. And the way you do this is you go to one of the wilderness information centers and speak with the ranger the day before your hike is supposed to start. So this typically means spending an extra 2 nights car camping before your trip starts. And again, this is when you already have a permit and you maybe want to go change it to improve that itinerary. And the way this works is the rangers have a limited number of those walk-up permits, so availabilities for a given site on a given night, and if there's an option to improve your permit, they can help change that itinerary for you. We recommend going and waiting in line at one of these wilderness information centers before they open at 7:30 so that you have the best chance of changing that permit. The way we did it is we got to one of these wilderness information centers at about 7 a.m. and waited about half an hour. There were 2 people in line ahead of us. They were both trying for walk-up permits and they actually both got them. We were able to alter our itinerary to improve it significantly. The ranger was super helpful in helping us alter that itinerary, and we're definitely glad that we did this because it made our trip so much better overall. Originally, we had an alternative route on the east side that actually didn't go through one of the best parts of the trail. So we were super stoked that we were able to alter our itinerary to do that section of the trail because it ended up being our favorite part. So this was definitely worth it, even though we had to car camp 2 extra nights before our trip even started. We also spent the day before our hike kind of exploring the visitor center and kind of the day use areas, which was really fun and helped us get even more excited for our hike. One final tip about getting one of these permits for groups that are less than 6 people, so the normal backcountry sites, what you can do is form a group of 5 people that you think you might want to hike the trail with. And even if you don't have concrete plans to actually do the trail with these 5 people, you can all apply for the early access lottery individually. And if any one of you get one of those permits, then you can all 5 hike the trail together. Before you even apply for a permit, or after you are notified that you win one of the early access lottery permits, we highly recommend doing some thinking about how to plan your itinerary. And when you do this, you're going to want to consider a few things. First and foremost is your starting and ending point, which is almost always going to be the same spot if you want to do the whole trail and leave your car in one place the whole time. You'll also want to decide if you're doing it clockwise or counterclockwise. Both ways are really great. Kind of just depends on what you want to do. There are only 3 places to cache your food and fuel, which is highly recommended because it saves a ton of weight. Really, 1 cache is all that you need. Kind of splits that 8 to 10 days up into 2, 4 or 5 day sections. It's worth considering food that is available at off-trail sources. So there's a restaurant at the Longmire Visitor Center, which we'll cover. And there's also a snack shack at the Sunrise Visitor Center. So both of these have food and beverages that you can buy, which can be a huge boost. You also want to consider the drive time to your starting and ending point, depending on where you're coming from. And then also how many miles you can hike in each day and what you're comfortable with. So you might end up doing 8 days or even less, or maybe you need a bit more time and you're doing 10 days or more. So at this point, we're going to jump into an overview of the trail to help you get your bearings and feel more prepared when you get your itinerary set up. So I'm going to hop on my computer and open up that map that I mentioned at the beginning of this video. It's also in our article, which again, I'll link in the description. And this map we created using Google My Maps. It's an interactive way to kind of view features on the map. So I've added in all the campgrounds, the typical trailheads that you can start and end at, different food sources that I mentioned, like those restaurants, different points of interest, things that you probably want to check out, like waterfalls and lakes, and some of the best views that we enjoyed. I've packed all these resources into this map. Okay, so here's that article. What I'm going to do right now is just scroll down. Again, this has a ton of helpful information. A lot of the same stuff that I'm talking about in this video, but also it's nice to have it in text form when you can check out the tables that we have so that you have a better understanding of the trail and you can go through this information at your own pace and kind of come back to it. So hopefully it's a helpful resource for you. Here's the map that we created, and what you can do is just click on this button here and open it into a new tab. So if you've never used Google My Maps before, I definitely recommend checking it out. It's a really helpful tool for planning any sort of trip. One thing you can do too is change the base maps on this Google My Maps, and that can be really helpful when planning. You can also come up here and click these 3 dots and actually open it in Google Earth, which lets you kind of fly around and get a bit more perspective on different places. For now, I'll just keep it in this view and I'll kind of cycle through each of these things that I want to talk about to help you plan. So I want to start with the main trailheads that you can start and end from. And there's really 3 places that I would recommend starting and ending from. And that's the Longmire trailhead, which is down here. There's kind of 2 different places you can park your car. I recommend just parking down here at the Longmire Visitor Center, which has the Wilderness Information Center there where you can pick up your permit and get some more information on relevant trail conditions before you head out. The second place where you can start and end is up here at the Sunrise area. This is on the northeast side. You can actually start down here at the White River Campground, or up here at the Sunrise Visitor Center area. Both places you can park your car for long periods of time. I'd recommend being at the Sunrise area if you start in this kind of part of the trail. There's a huge parking lot with tons of parking options, so you'll always have a spot to leave your vehicle. So the last option for starting and ending is at Mowich Lake, and that's kind of on the northwest side. There's a campground here and a trailhead. This is a less common place for people to start and end, just because there's less facilities overall. There's no Wilderness Information Center here at the trailhead. So really I'd recommend starting at Sunrise or Longmire. Those are the two main places that people start at. We started at Longmire, and kind of depending on where you start, obviously dictates where you're gonna cache your food. So like I said, I'd recommend starting at Longmire and getting your food cached at Sunrise, or starting at Sunrise and getting your food cache at Longmire. Both are fine options, whether you're going clockwise or counterclockwise, and you'll probably have a better idea of maybe what's good for you when you jump in and do your own planning. And the way food caching works is you can drive to that location yourself and drop your cache off kind of manually at one of these wilderness information centers, and that way you can ensure that your food cache is there. That's what we did, and we had the extra time, so it wasn't an inconvenience for us, really. I mean, we had to do some extra driving. Another option is you can actually mail your cache to a specific address, and it'll be there when you go pick it up. Either way works, just kind of depends on your preference. I'd recommend reading more about the food caching, how that all works on the National Parks website. They have a ton of good information there. You might consider planning your itinerary around the two off-trail food options that I mentioned. Again, that's the Longmire Dining Hall, which has a full breakfast, lunch, and dinner menu. They have some funky hours, so you might want to check that out depending on what time of day you might get in. I'll leave a link to their hours and their menu below. That Longmire Dining Hall is pretty pricey, but it can be totally worth it for a full meal. Another option is the Sunrise Snack Shack, which actually has hot dogs and some other snacks as well as beer. That is a little bit off of the trail, so I think it's about half mile each way, so maybe you're adding an extra mile onto your hike, but it can be really worth it if you're there between 11 a.m. and 5 p.m. So now I want to talk about the different campgrounds. There's 23 campgrounds total, and 3 of these are actually car accessible. 20 of them are purely backcountry campgrounds or wilderness campgrounds. Again, every one of those you need a permit for each night that you're planning on staying. So you obviously won't be staying at all 23 of these. Your itinerary will probably have 8 to 10 depending on how many nights you're out on the trail. So all the campgrounds have varying number of campsites. Some have only 2, some have a whole lot more, especially the car accessible ones. And the number of campsites will kind of dictate how much availability there is. Each campground is unique and kind of has its own charms. Some of them have better views, some of them have more mosquitoes. They're all a little bit different. So I will say that there are some campgrounds that we really loved staying at. I'll quickly mention the 3 that we loved the most. So up here on the north part of the trail, this one here called Dig Creek Campground was super unique and special for us. There's actually only 2 what I'll call individual sites. So again, that's groups of 5 people or less. Most of the campgrounds have more sites than that. It has a really nice kind of smaller, intimate feel. And actually one of those 2 sites is super pretty, and it overlooks this valley here looking to the northwest. It really feels like you're in kind of a bird's nest on the edge of this cliff, which is just such a cool vibe. Right next to that campsite, there's a creek that kind of rushes down this steep rocky hillside, and it's so pretty and nice for taking a quick bathe after a long day of hiking. So we'd recommend staying a night at Dig Creek Campground if you can, and trying to get there early to get that one site that has the better view. 2 of the most popular campgrounds are Summerland and Indian Bar. They're both on this east side of the mountain, which is probably the most beautiful section of the trail. They both have some pretty great views. We stayed at Indian Bar, and we just found that was super pretty. So overall, I'd recommend trying to get Dig Creek, Summerland, or Indian Bar and stay at one of those for a night if you can. So I want to kind of run through the trail as a whole and talk at a high level about each section or each side of the mountain. Down here on the south side, you have a lot of day visitors. There's this road that kind of goes along the whole south side, and the trail sometimes overlaps that road. and you see a lot of people day hiking or just stopping at the viewpoints. For that reason, it seemed a little bit less remote to be on the south side of the trail. That said, there are some really cool waterfalls like this Narada Falls that was really special, and there's a few other ones along the way. There's also some really nice lakes, Louise Lake and Reflection Lake, which have some really cool views. Particularly Reflection Lake has a really nice view of Mount Rainier in the background. In general, the west side of the mountain is pretty forested. There are some really nice views that are kind of down in this southwest side, particularly by this Mirror Lake area. We thought the flowery meadows there were just absolutely gorgeous, and there's a really cool viewpoint that has one of the patrol cabins and the mountain in the background. So if you can hit that at sunrise or sunset, that might be something to shoot for. This spot right here up on this kind of higher elevation point is also a really nice viewpoint of the mountain. There's some really pretty lakes here along the way. One of them is the Golden Lakes area. This would probably be a really cool spot to camp. We didn't stay here ourselves, but we'd recommend considering that if it fits your itinerary. Either way, you could stop here for a break. There's a really nice swimming hole right here at this lake, and there's a cute little patrol cabin that just looks cool. Consider stopping there for lunch or something. But for the most part, the west side is a lot of old growth forests, which are really special to walk through. I mean, there's some insanely big trees there. I'll note quickly on this northwest side of the mountain, there's an alternative route. So the actual Wonderland Trail technically goes kind of on this more northern route, but there's a variation called the Spray Park Trail, and that is down a little bit more southern, closer to the mountain. The Spray Park variation is higher elevation, but it also might be a little bit shorter. So we definitely recommend doing this Spray Park variation. It was super pretty when we did it. The views were absolutely gorgeous on a clear day. There are 2 campgrounds along this Spray Park Trail. We didn't stay at either of them. Again, we stayed at Dig Creek Campground. This hill right here is pretty steep, just to keep in mind. But overall, Spray Park variation was absolutely gorgeous, and we'd highly recommend it. I'm sure this other way is also really nice, but it's maybe a bit more forested without the same amount of views. The north side of the mountain is fairly exposed with a good amount of views between kind of Dig Creek Campground, especially once you get up to this Mystic Lake area. One thing to keep in mind is checking out this moraine park. There's a little cute pond here, which had some incredible views coming out of the trees here. So we got some really nice photos from that spot, so I definitely recommend checking that out. It's kind of easy to miss. And then Mystic Lake here seemed like a really cool campground. We didn't stay there, but we had a nice lunch break at the lake. Particularly when you get a little bit more towards the northeast side, it becomes really exposed in this area. This skyscraper pass is absolutely beautiful. Really nice views of the mountain from this angle. And then this whole section is fairly exposed. There is some opportunity to see some mountain goats in this area. Once you get to the sunrise area, you see a lot of day hikers, which isn't as nice as being in some of the more remote sections. That said, we did stay at Sunrise Campground. Didn't really like that campground a whole lot, but I could see how if you're in this area during sunrise or sunset, it could be really pretty. We picked up our cache at the White River Campground, and it was really easy. There's a ranger station here. I've labeled it on the map where the cache is located, and it's a little bit off the main trail, but really not too far. In general, once you climb up from the White River area into the Summerland area, it gets really, really pretty. This whole east side of the mountain is absolutely gorgeous. It stays at a pretty high elevation throughout this entire section. The highest point of the trail is the Panhandle Gap, which was a little bit sketchy for us, and depending on the amount of snow that's there, it might dictate how you approach that section. Main idea is to talk with other hikers who have already done it and are coming the opposite way, or ask some of the rangers what the conditions are at that point. For us, it seemed like a really steep, snowy section that if you fell, you'd slide down into some rocks below. It was like a 45-degree slope. So we actually opted for kind of an alternative way. We kind of scampered up this area and came up this ridge, which was really steep, and we were actually sort of climbing. Ended up being probably more sketchy than the snow section. We didn't really see any other people there when we were doing it, so we didn't get any information on hikers that have already crossed that section. This could probably be the most intimidating part of the trail for a lot of folks, including us. I'd recommend, again, just talking with people who have done it if you can. So if you're going clockwise, you'll continue along this higher section on the east side, and again, this whole area is just so pretty. We saw a whole herd of mountain goats during our time there, which was absolutely incredible for us. It was my first time seeing mountain goats, and to see a whole herd of 30 or 40 was really, really special. This section here leading down to Indian Bar is pretty steep, so whether you're going up or down, it's definitely challenging. The views, again, are just so good that it'll fuel you. Ideally, you have a clear and sunny day when you hit this eastern part of the mountain. Again, I think it's the best part, and try to stay at Indian Bar or Summerland Campground if you can. So finally, some other planning logistics to consider. If the permitting system and building your itinerary wasn't enough to plan, you do need to consider the time of year that you go, the level of snowpack that you could be expecting, different water sources and dry sections, as well as trail reroutes. Now, for all of these things that kind of change from year to year, you should consult one of the rangers at a wilderness information center, and they will help give you up-to-date information. So what you should do is go into the Wilderness Information Center the day of or before your hike and talk to a ranger, but you can also take a picture of some of the resources that they have. So they'll have pieces of paper which dictate certain snowpack concerns or water availability concerns or trail reroutes, which are all really relevant and important to know about. Some of the campgrounds aren't super close to water, so you can fill up water ahead of time. Typically, you won't need more than 1 or 2 liters on you at a given time. Water is super plentiful in general on the trail. I recommend having a 3-liter capacity. We did utilize that 3 liters per person for a few instances where water wasn't really close to an individual campground. So you fill up ahead of time, and that way you have enough water for that night, whether you're cooking or drinking that water. It's worth noting that the driest section is between Indian Bar and Nickel Creek Campground. I think it's about 6 or 7 miles, so you're going to want to fill up probably 2 liters for that section, depending on how hot of a day it is. But other than that, water is really available. Regarding the time of year that you can do this trail, it's typically from late July to the end of September. Wildflowers will peak at certain times at different elevations, and there'll also be more plentiful berries like huckleberries at different times, again at different elevations. Snowpack will change based on the time of year, but also the year that you're hiking. So some years just have more snow. You should be comfortable hiking on snow, at least for some distances. So definitely bring sunglasses to help with that glare. And also, I highly recommend hiking poles. You typically don't need any sort of extra gear than just your hiking poles and some sturdy shoes. There were some trail reroutes when we did the hike. Again, we talked to a ranger at the Wilderness Information Center, and they had some up-to-date information. The reroutes were really well marked, so it really wasn't a challenge for us. It does add a little bit of miles typically. A few other things to think about: there are going to be mosquitoes and biting flies on this trail. Depending on the section, they might be better or worse. So I really recommend having a head net. We'll link to that in the description. That was pretty much a game changer for hanging out at camp. Of course, have long sleeves and long pants when you're hanging out at camp to keep those bugs off of you. It's pretty critical to have a paper map. You can have a digital GPS map in addition to a paper map. We will leave the link to the map we used in the description. This one was kind of a booklet style, so you didn't have to unfold the entire map each time you wanted to check out your location. So that was super handy. It's made specifically for the Wonderland Trail, so it's got all the relevant information that you'll ever need in that map. You're going to want to be comfortable with packing your gear and your food for a trip of 8 to 10 plus days and being prepared for all sorts of weather. We bought a few items of gear specifically for this trip to be a little bit lighter. For us, that made a world of difference in cutting down on our weight. We purchased a Durston X Mid 2 tent, which was our first ultralight tent, and it was more affordable than some of the other options. We really like that tent, and we'll link it along with all the other gear that we use down in the description below. I also bought a Gossamer Gear ultralight backpack, which I really loved. I would definitely recommend checking out their gear if you're looking for a backpack. They also make tents. It was my first real piece of ultralight gear, and it had served me so well on that trail, and I'm really excited to use it on future hikes as well. You should definitely bring a rain jacket or a poncho, potentially rain pants too. We got super lucky and it really didn't rain at all on our actual hike, but the day and the night before we started, it was totally dumping rain and people on the trail got absolutely soaked. We heard from a lot of folks that they were ready to jump off the trail because it was so rainy and wet. So you really need to be prepared for any type of weather. As far as food goes, you really got to know how much food you need. We had some people on the trail ask us for food and we didn't really feel comfortable giving away any of our calories given that we're gonna need them ourselves. Another note on food, we would highly recommend dehydrating some of your own meals, particularly your dinners and maybe some fruit. We bought a dehydrator and we'll link to that dehydrator that we have on Amazon. It's pretty cheap, but it made a world of a difference in feeding us on this trip. What you should do is the month or two before your hike, just make dinners as you normally do, but dehydrate 1 or 2 or even more servings of those meals in your dehydrator each time you make a dinner. When you go to start your hike, you'll have a number of your meals already prepared. Doing it this way is gonna save you a ton of money. And also these meals that you make at home are gonna be way tastier than the store-bought freeze-dried meals that you'll find at places like REI. It made a world of a difference for us to get to camp and be super hungry and eat some homemade chili or pasta or chana masala. All of these meals that we made at home were so flavorful and tasty and honestly more nourishing and affordable as well. So I'd highly recommend getting acquainted with a cheap dehydrator. Also, another pro tip is bring stuff to make a salad on your first night out on the trail. When you're on the trail for 8 or more nights, it's really important to have some greens. So I'll wrap this up here. I know that was a ton of information. It can be a little overwhelming with a trip of this scale, given all the obstacles, like the permits especially. But again, it's really important that you acquaint yourself with that permitting system. So I'll leave a link to all of the official national park resources on the permitting system and other resources, like they have some really nice maps and tables that help you kind of plan out your campgrounds and your itinerary. Again, the food caching is an important step, so definitely read their page on that. Please check out our article and that map that we made. We took a lot of time in making that article and that map, and we really hope that it serves as a valuable resource for you when you're planning your trip on the Wonderland Trail. Overall, I hope you gained a lot of information from this video. Apply to that early access lottery each year that you want to do this trail. That's probably the most important part, is that you just do that every February. Check that page that I'm gonna link in the description. I hope you get one of those early access lottery permits. If you don't, check out the normal access window and then also consider doing a walk-up. You are gonna have a great time on this trail if you get one of those permits, and I'm confident if you apply year after year, you'll eventually get one, especially if you get together with a group of 5 people and you all apply individually. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe and stay tuned for our future videos. So that's all I've got. I hope you have a great time hiking the Wonderland Trail. See you later.